I want to welcome those of you who are watching this morning, and our Jeremiah study continues to pick a lot of people up. Had a friend in Mississippi who texted me and said he had to watch last week's twice because there were, he said, some really good stuff in there that he did not know. So for all of you watching, turn your Bibles to Jeremiah chapter 7. Quick way of review. By the way, did y'all get these slides from last week? Okay, excellent. I think they're very helpful. These are chronological slides. I'm not going to go through them again today, except to point out this. These two dates right here, these two dates are the dates that are required for you to memorize to understand the Old Testament. In 722 BC, the northern kingdom of Israel falls to Assyria, and the 10 tribes of the north, called the 10 lost tribes, are scattered. Now, a few families from each of the 10 tribes made it safely to the southern kingdom of Judah. But in 586 BC, Judah falls to Babylon. And Jeremiah the prophet lives in Judah. He speaks in Jerusalem, the capital of Judah, and he is prophesying the fall of Judah. We've seen this in the past. The United Kingdom of Israel lasts for 120 years. Saul, David, and Solomon were the three kings of the United Kingdom. In 931 BC, the kingdom split into two, the northern kingdom of Israel, the southern kingdom of Judah. And remember, the capital of the north was Samaria. The capital of the south was Jerusalem. And you'll never be able to understand the book of Kings and Chronicles until you understand this division of the kingdom. Because Kings jumps back and forth between the kings of the north, the kings of the south, and so on. So, as I just said a minute ago, the northern kingdom of Israel fell in 722 BC. The Assyrians attempted to conquer Judah 20 years later. But as I've said, some of my favorite chapters in the Bible, Isaiah 37, 38, 39, we hear the story of how King Hezekiah of Judah and his father-in-law, Isaiah the prophet, how they lead the people to repentance, and Yahweh saves Judah from Assyrian capture. But just about from 701, where Judah is saved, until 586, what is that? 115 years later, Judah falls to Babylon. And this is where Jeremiah comes in. Jeremiah is a prophet who is born after the fall of Assyria. He is born in 650 BC in Judah. He dies 70 years later in Egypt. But as a young man of 23, he is called to be a prophet to Judah. And his warnings are warnings of coming judgment because of the idolatry of the Jews. And sure enough, just exactly as we'll read today, just exactly as Jeremiah prophesied, in time, Judah falls to Babylon. And of course, we'll see this later on in our study of Jeremiah. By the time the Babylonians, under Nebuchadnezzar, the king, the wicked king of Babylon, by the time they surround Jerusalem, siege the city, destroy the fortified cities around Jerusalem in Judah, by that time, the people of Judah had gotten so sick and tired of Jeremiah's prophecies that they put him in prison, put a block around his neck, and shut him up. And that's what saved his life. Because when the Babylonian soldiers pulled him out of the ruins of Zedekiah's palace, he was in a pit underneath, in a prison pit. They took him to Nebuchadnezzar, and Nebuchadnezzar said, "Let him go. Any enemy of my enemy is my friend." And that's why he survived the Babylonian capture of Jerusalem and went with a group of Jews to Egypt, where he would die 6 years later. So, the scroll of Jeremiah, as we have seen, we're in chapter 7. The first 29 chapters of Jeremiah are prophecies of judgment for Judah. Prophecies that Jeremiah gives to wake up the people of Judah. And Jeremiah 7 is one of the clearest that we'll read. And then, of course, the New Covenant is beautifully portrayed in these 4 chapters in the middle of the book. And then the last section of the book is a diary where Jeremiah just talks about what happened to him in the siege and the fall of Jerusalem. Jeremiah was born during the days of King Manasseh, the greatest conversion story you've never heard about in the Old Testament. I told you it about 3 weeks ago. Manasseh, after he was saved, converted, came home. He was converted in Babylon. He had been taken captive by the Assyrians because the Assyrians at this time controlled Babylon, not the Babylonians, the Chaldeans. So in Babylon, Manasseh is converted and the most wicked king of Judah, the longest serving king. The last 4 or 5 years of his life is devoted to Yahweh, and he disciples his grandson Josiah. And so after Manasseh dies, his son Ammon, who is as wicked as his father, just 2 years later is brutally assassinated by the temple guard, and the people took Josiah at the age of 8, who had been discipled by his grandfather, and put him on the throne. And Rochelle, what that means is we're going to see our grandsons. Manasseh discipled Josiah when he was 4, 5, and 6 years of age. You're never too young as a grandchild to be taught the things of God. Okay? And then Josiah is a really good king who reigns during the days of Jeremiah. Okay? And then you see the last few kings that we'll talk about the later we go in our study of Jeremiah. As a young man, we saw this in Jeremiah 1, he is called at the age of 23. So that's 627 BC. Let me give you some perspective here. That's 627 BC. If Jerusalem falls in 586, the difference between, Hazel, help me out with the math, 627 and 586, 14 plus 27, 41 years. He preaches for 41 years before what he proclaims comes to pass. Are you with me? And so here's the deal. I am proclaiming that our government is going to fall. The government of the United States. It will collapse. I've been saying this for 10 years. It's going to happen because you can't do what we're doing and survive. But for me to do it, April, in the same manner of Jeremiah, I got another 31 years to wait.
If it lasts.
No, exactly.
It's because we have more socialists coming up and with the Democratic name than
it's nuts. If the socialists take over, we're bankrupt within 2 years. What's going to happen, though, and I won't get into this, it's going to be what's called a T-bond crisis, where when you print money, you're supposed to have people who will buy your debt. Everybody is staying away from U.S. Treasuries, and they're buying gold because they don't trust the United States anymore. And by the way, Hazel, do you know when the trust completely collapsed? In February of 2022, when Joe Biden ordered the freezing of Russian Treasury bonds in central banks, saying, keep them, don't give them to Russia. Russia's like, okay, we're done. We're never buying U.S. debt again. They started buying gold. China, the same thing. They used to own like 60% of our debt, and it's gone down dramatically. So if nobody's buying our debt anymore, Sue, then who's buying our debt? Who said that? Hazel, you're right. We're buying it ourselves. That's just nuts. Anyway, I say all that kind of stuff, and people say, you're a windbag. You're just a bunch of hot air. By the way, that's what they said of Jeremiah. Stop. Those are empty words. Everything's going to continue like it always has. You have no clue what you're talking about. You're just a preacher. How do you know anything about finance? Well, because I know the past. And today in chapter 7, Jeremiah's message is, remember Shiloh. Remember Shiloh. And by the way, you're like, how can I remember Shiloh when I don't even know what Shiloh is? Okay? This is the lesson. The people of Judah would have known, Rochelle, what Shiloh is, what happened to Shiloh, but because we don't, the profound message of Jeremiah 7 is lost. So that's our study today. April, I can't believe you said that. Absolutely. It's exactly like remember the Alamo. Now, most of our kids in school today wouldn't have a clue what the Alamo is. But every Texan, yeah, well, true. We do because we watch John Wayne movies, yeah. Every Texan in the 1840s would have known what the Alamo was. Just like every Jew would have known what Shiloh was. Okay, so in Jeremiah 7:12, we'll see this as we start reading in just a moment. Here is Shiloh, right here. It is 40 miles north of Jerusalem. It is in the tribal land of Ephraim. Ephraim is the largest tribe of the northern kingdom. Okay? Now the northern kingdom, by the time Jeremiah gives the prophecy in Jeremiah 7, is gone. It's gone. So when he's saying remember Shiloh, he's remembering events that happened a long time before these words are spoken in Jeremiah 7. Okay? So what happened at Shiloh? Well, several things that you'll instantly recognize. First, the boy Samuel, that's where he lived. And he slept outside the Tabernacle of Moses, which was erected at Shiloh. He was an orphan boy. Now that does not mean that he didn't have a mom. Hannah was his mom. But as we'll see in Jeremiah 7, to be called fatherless or an orphan just meant you didn't have a dad. And so the high priest Eli basically raised him. Now, here is the timeline of Samuel. Samuel is a very important figure in Scripture. He is the last of the judges. He is the last of the prophets during the days of the judges. And when Eli, the high priest, and his sons Hophni and Phinehas die, he becomes the priest of Israel. Prophet, priest, and judge. So here's the deal. And I'll send you this slide. By the way, again, Rochelle, I did not get that one email. Remind me. If you're listening to this and you did not get the slides last week, but you gave us your email, we apologize. We had email problems. It was down, and we'll get it added first of next week, and y'all will get these probably on Monday. Okay, Samuel was born in 1108 BC, and he was dedicated at Shiloh. You read about this in the book that bears his name, 1 Samuel. Okay? He was called by God when he was just a young boy, 12 years of age. He was called of God. The high priest dies about 8 years later. Saul is anointed king of Israel in 1051, and he's anointed by Samuel. David is anointed by Samuel in 1025. But you say, wait, he didn't become king until 1011. Right. So what happened? Well, David is anointed king by Samuel, and then he has to run for his life because Saul is ticked off. Okay? And so Saul is wanting to kill David. All right? Well, Samuel dies in 1020 at the age of 88. Shiloh is his hometown. Now, what is Shiloh? It's a city. And 7 years after the children of Israel crossed the Jordan at the house of the crossing, Beth Abarah in Hebrew. Beth means house, Abarah means crossing. It's the same place where Jesus Christ was baptized, the true Israel. It was the Ark of the Covenant that led them across the Jordan River, which had been flooded. And the priests, the Aaronic priests, the sons of Aaron, were carrying the ark on their shoulders, and it led the people of Israel into the land of Canaan. And of course, they came to Jericho, marched around it, blew the trumpets, the walls fell. Then they went to Ai, and they had a defeat, and they asked, okay, wait, why? And basically, Yahweh says, you're not trusting me. You're trusting in your might. Trust in me. Okay? Then they go through the land of Canaan, conquering the Canaanites. 7 years after crossing the Jordan, Joshua 18:1 says, all the people of Israel gathered at Shiloh, and they erected the Tabernacle of Moses. Now get this. For 324 years, the Tabernacle of Moses was at Shiloh. How long have we been a nation? 250 years. Almost. Thank you, April. 74 years more than we've been a nation. The priests served Yahweh at Shiloh. The sacrifices were offered at Shiloh. The tabernacle of Moses sat at Shiloh. The Ark of the Covenant was in Shiloh until Shiloh was destroyed. It was destroyed when the Philistines captured the city and stole the ark. And Yahweh allowed it to be destroyed because the people of Israel were moving into idolatry, particularly the worship of false gods. So this is that great story in 1 Samuel where the ark is taken by the Philistines and they take it to their cities, their Philistine cities, including Gath. Who was from Gath? Goliath, the great big giant Philistine. That was his hometown. And what they did, the Philistines took the Ark of Yahweh. And by the way, when we say the Ark of Yahweh, we're talking about the movie, Raiders of the Lost Ark, okay? The Ark. And they put it in the temple of Dagon, one of their gods, or Dagon. And they set it in the temple. You can read about this in, I think, 1 Samuel 4 or 5. And they just leave it there. They store it there. And the next morning, the Bible tells us that the Philistines came into the temple of their god, Dagon or Dagon. And the statue, big statue made of gold, silver, wood that they all worshiped, had fallen onto the ground before the ark. The head was cut off, the hands were cut off, and the feet were cut off. And the Philistines got scared. So they said, we don't want this thing. They put it on a cart and sent the cart back to the Jews. And it came to rest at a place called Kiriath Jearim. But, and Bill, in our study of 1 Chronicles, if you remember, when David becomes king, he calls for it from Kiriath Jearim. And, the priests are supposed to carry it. But the Jews remember how the Philistines sent it back on a cart, so they imitate that. And as they're going to Jerusalem to take the ark, to King David, it begins to fall off, and they reach out, touch it, and they die. Okay, so David, who's at the head, of taking it back, stop. And Rochelle, he orders that the priests come, carry the ark to a house of a man named Obed-Edom. And Obed-Edom, for 3 months, watches over the ark until David and his men come to the house of Obed-Edom, and then they properly carry it into the Tabernacle of David, the tent of David. It's a tremendous story. But the point is this. What you've got to remember is that the ark stayed in Shiloh for 324 years. And then the Philistines absolutely destroyed Shiloh when they captured it. Make sense?
Are there any ruins or anything at Shiloh today?
Yes, but it's on the West Bank.
So you can't get to it.
No, you can't get to it.
But
Yeah.
if that opened up,
You could go to it. There would be. No, in fact, good question, Rochelle. They still excavate, even though it's on the West Bank, but you have to have all kinds of permission, and then you have to have soldiers who are guarding you the whole time. And they have discovered the ruins of the 11th century, just exactly like the Bible says. Okay? So now let's start reading. That's the background for Shiloh. Let's start reading Jeremiah 7, verse 1. Any other questions before we start? All right, let's read. The word that came to Jeremiah from Yahweh, saying, Stand in the gate of Yahweh's house and proclaim there this word, and say, Hear the word of Yahweh, all you of Judah, who enter by these gates to worship Yahweh. Thus says Yahweh of armies, the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, Amend your ways and deeds, and I will let you dwell in this place. By the way, remember, the main entrance into Solomon's temple were the southern steps. Now, the eastern gate was used for royal officials and high ceremonies, like the red heifer sacrifice, because you cross the red heifer bridge across the Kidron Valley. But most of the people entered the southern steps. Now, Sue, you remember going to Jerusalem and sitting on these steps. They're still there. And there were baptismal pools that the priest would use before they entered. But the people, as they entered, would sing what's called the Psalms of Ascent. They're found in the book of Psalms, and you can it'll say underneath, Psalm of Ascent. And they would chant these psalms as they walked up. Well, here comes Jeremiah. And they're up there, and he's, Hear the word of Yahweh, you who enter into the house of Yahweh. Now, can you imagine? They're like, who is this nut? And no wonder they put a block around his neck and put him in prison. And amend your ways, amend your deeds. Then I, Yahweh, will let you dwell in this place. I mean, that's why, April, no matter how loud they are and how crazy they sing, I never mock street preachers. Seriously, I just don't. Because you got to be half nuts to do what Jeremiah did anyway. Verse 4. Do not trust in deceptive words. And here are the deceptive words. And by the way, these are what the false prophets were saying. This is the temple of Yahweh, the temple of Yahweh, the temple of Yahweh. In Hebrew, there are no exclamation marks. There's no bolding of anything. There's no underlining. The way you emphasize something is repetition. This is the house of Yahweh. This is the house of Yahweh. This is the house of Yahweh. Basically, what the prophet is saying is this. The false prophets are telling you this is Yahweh's house. I'm telling you, it's not anymore. And I'm telling you why. Okay? But this repetition in Hebrew carries over among the Jews, even in Aramaic and in Greek, languages they would later learn. I was trying to teach this to little boys in Sunday school one time. I think Joe Skoda and I, at Emmanuel, we taught 6th grade boys together in Sunday school. And I asked, why did Jesus say, truly, truly, I say unto you? And one little boy said, because he stuttered like I do. And I thought, wow, what a cute little kid. So I said no. But I never thought about that. Yeah, kind of. I see that. Yeah, April.
I know he was trying to emphasize.
Yes.
But I know when my husband would get onto the girls and he would repeat himself to make sure he's driving, their eyes would soon just glaze over.
No, exactly. By the way, I'm just like Marlon, April. Rochelle says, I am incessant. I will repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat. And sometimes eyes glaze over. But it's the force of emphasis. And so what he's saying is the false prophets are telling you this is Yahweh's house. No. I'm telling you, this is Yahweh speaking to you through me. Verse 5. If you truly amend your ways and your deeds, if you truly practice justice between a man and his neighbor, if you do not oppress the alien or the foreigner, the orphan or the widow, and do not shed innocent blood in this place, nor walk after other gods to your own ruin, then I will let you dwell in this place in the land that I gave to your fathers forever and ever. 6 things are mentioned in those 2 verses. And here they are. Jeremiah is saying, and again, I don't think I'm exaggerating. He is yelling this because it's outdoors and people are chanting and he wants them to hear. You think you're going to Yahweh's house? If you practice justice with your neighbor, if you do not oppress the foreigner. By the way, what does that mean? There were some Canaanites, Moabites, Jebusites, who wanted to be a part of Israel, and NASB calls them aliens, but they're foreigners. They could, if they pledged allegiance to Yahweh only, if they paid the temple tithe, if they did certain things, they were proselytes accepted into Israel. But some Jews were like, they considered them second-class citizens. Make sense? Do not oppress the fatherless. Now, some of your translations may say orphans, but it in Hebrew is truly fatherless because a child was considered fatherless in losing a father, even though it wasn't what we would call an orphan, because we think of an orphan as not having a father or a mother. In Hebrew, it's if you didn't have a father, you were fatherless, but some of your translations say orphan. Do not oppress the widow. See, there you go here. Here's what was happening. The widows and the fatherless needed help. And the Jews were like, no, we'll take advantage of them. Do not shed innocent blood. Murder. Getting angry. Killing people who, and by the way, you could kill somebody privately in Jeremiah's day, and it's not like today, TNA, what is that? What's that show? CSI? You could get away with it. Because who sees it? Who'll find it? Who'll catch you? Very, very difficult. Much easier to kill in Jeremiah's day. Do not walk after other gods. Okay, those are the 6 things. You do that, you can dwell here in Yahweh's temple. But obviously, you remember in Jeremiah 5, April, Jeremiah walks around looking for one just person. And he couldn't find anybody. Only the king and Jeremiah. But he was looking for a citizen on the streets. And Yahweh says, I'll save Jerusalem if you find one. By the way, this is what the Apostle Paul wrote about in the book of Romans when he said, there is no one who is righteous, no, not one. Everyone has gone his own way. Everyone's mouth is an open sepulcher. And then after showing us that we're not just or righteous, he portrays the love of God in sending His just and righteous Son to pay the debts of the unrighteous and to give all the blessings of full obedience to those who trust Him. That's the gospel. Okay? Now, let's go on. Any thoughts or questions? Okay, verse 8. Behold, you are trusting, or look at verse 7. If you do these things, then I will let you dwell in this place, in the land that I gave to your fathers forever and ever. Based upon covenant faithfulness, it would be theirs. Verse 8. Behold, you are trusting in deceptive words. What are the deceptive words? This is Yahweh's house. We are Yahweh's people. We live here. He lives here. We're all okay. Verse 9. Will you steal, murder, and commit adultery, and swear falsely, and offer sacrifices to Baal, and walk after other gods that you have not known? By the way, those things that they're doing are the exact opposites of these 6 things. Stealing from the fatherless and the widow, murdering, walking after other gods. Will you do this? Verse 9. Then come and stand before me, and he's speaking on behalf of Yahweh, in this house which is called my name, and say, we are delivered, we are safe, and then continue all these abominations? Has this house which is called by my name become a den of robbers in your sight? Behold, I have seen it, declares Yahweh. Does that remind you of anything right there? Same people. This is exactly what Jesus did. You have made my house a den of thieves. Now, most Christians, when they go to that text in the New Testament, they think, well, Jesus is declaring Himself to be God. And by the way, He is. He who has seen me has seen the Father. But in this instance, in the Gospels, when He turned the tables over, the money changers, who were the money changers? Watch this now. The fatherless and the widows would come, and they had to buy a sacrifice. And so the money changers would charge them more. They would take advantage. They would steal. Okay? It would become a den of thieves. So, now when Jesus did this, the Jews probably would have reflected on Jeremiah and Jeremiah's words, because they would have had read to them on the Shabbat, on a consistent basis, the scroll of Jeremiah. Okay? All right, let's go on. What verse? Thank you. All right, now here we go. This is the title for our study, verse 12. But go now to my place, which was in Shiloh, where I made my name dwell at the first, when you first entered Canaan, and see what I did to it because of the wickedness of my people Israel. Remember Shiloh, is what he's saying. Remember Shiloh. It was destroyed in 1075 BC because of the wickedness of Israel. Verse 13. And now, because you have done all these things, what things? The 6 things that are the opposites of what they should be doing, declares Yahweh. And I spoke to you. Now look at this next phrase. Here's how I spoke. Rising up early and speaking, but you did not hear, and I called you, but you did not answer. Does that remind you of anything? Early in the morning, I called you, and we'll see in just a moment, He calls through the prophets. But you did not answer. What does it remind you of? Rochelle, anything in particular? How about this? Remember what happened at Shiloh? Who grew up in Shiloh? Samuel. Do you remember what happened to Samuel when he was young? Yahweh called him. The contrast that is being made here from Jeremiah as the people are walking up, who would have been very familiar with Shiloh, who would have been extraordinarily familiar with Samuel, one of the great heroes of Israel. And they're walking up, I have called, and you have not answered. Remember Shiloh, where Samuel answered. So the contrast here is incredible. Samuel heard the call of Yahweh. At the age of 8, Israel did not hear the call of Yahweh through the prophets. It's a contrast that most American Christians would never, ever connect. So I called early in the morning, you did not hear. I called, you did not answer. Verse 14. Therefore I will do to the house which is called by my name, the house in which you trust, to the place which I gave you and your fathers, I will do to this house, Solomon's house, the temple, my house, where my name is, as I did to Shiloh. In other words, I'm going to destroy it. Now imagine this, Rochelle. Imagine the Jews walking up the steps listening to Jeremiah shout. Remember Shiloh. What happened at Shiloh is going to happen here. And they're like, he's a nut. Shut up. You're a windbag. And then he goes on. Yahweh says, I will cast you out of my sight as I have cast out all your brothers, all the offspring of Ephraim. By the way, the city of Shiloh, in what tribal land was the city of Shiloh located? Ephraim. Ephraim. The descendants of Ephraim are scattered by the Philistines. Shiloh is destroyed. That's going to happen here. All right, now, we come to verse 16, and you need to recognize that Yahweh now begins to speak to Jeremiah himself. And here's verse 16. One of the most remarkable verses you'll find in the Hebrew Scriptures. Yahweh says to Jeremiah, as for you, do not pray for this people, and do not lift up cry or prayer for them, and do not intercede with me, for I do not hear you. No. What does that mean? There are times when Yahweh removes the burden of prayer because judgment is near. Now, Rochelle, I thought of this because I was already preparing last night. We like to watch Jesse, what's his last name? Fox. Jesse Waters. There we go. So, in fact, I thought I might have been on Jesse Waters. It didn't happen for this campaign, Hazel. But last night, he calls it DEI Thursday, where he shows what's happening in the country in the name of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Was it the capital of Minnesota? At the capital of the state of Minnesota yesterday, they had drag, gay, queer celebrations in the capital, horrific sexual dancing of men who made themselves look like women. And I thought of this verse. There comes a time when the burden to pray for people is gone because judgment is near. Duh. Make sense? That's verse 16. Here's what he says to Jeremiah. Do you not see what they are doing in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem? The children gather wood. And by the way, they gather wood for sacrifices to idols. The fathers kindle the fire, and the women knead dough to make cakes for the Queen of Heaven. And they pour out drink offerings to other gods in order to spite me. So here's what Yahweh is saying to Jeremiah. Jeremiah, do you not see that these people who come up saying, this is the house of Yahweh, we are the people of Yahweh, we. They're going out, building fires, making cakes, and offering drink offerings and meal offerings to the priests of Baal, to the gods of Baal. Don't pray for them. Verse 19. Do they spite me, declares Yahweh? Is it not themselves they spite to their own shame? By the way, notice, what Yahweh is saying is, I'm not smitten by what they're doing. They are smiting themselves. In other words, I think it was Job that said, that which I have feared the most has come upon me. The thing that people don't understand is their rebellion against the Lord doesn't affect the Lord. Their rebellion against the Lord affects them. Verse 20. Therefore, thus says Adonai Yahweh, behold, my anger and my wrath will be poured out on this place, on man and on beast, on the trees of the field and on the fruit of the ground, and it will burn and not be quenched. By the way, this little phrase, it will burn and not be quenched. What else does that remind you of? Hell. Hell. Unquenchable fire, right? Okay. This is a fundamental mistake Christians make about unquenchable fire. It is not eternal tormenting. It is a judgment that will not be reversed. An unquenchable fire is a fire that can't be stopped from destroying. And so, I know some of my evangelical friends would call me a heretic, but I'll say this to them. Learn Hebrew, write commentaries on Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, all of the Hebrew Scriptures, and then come and call me a heretic. See, here's the thing. Hell is not a place where sinners are forever and eternally tormented. Where a 10-year-old boy who dies in his sins is being tormented for his sins forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever. Are you nuts? The judgment of God is death. The wages of sin is death. It is a fire that destroys, and it cannot be reversed. But the gift of God is life everlasting. So this is the unquenchable fire. Now somebody really sharp and thinking to themselves might say, whoa, wait a minute. In 586, when Jerusalem was destroyed and the temple was brought down by Nebuchadnezzar, it was rebuilt. But Bill, what was the difference between the temple of Jerusalem in Solomon's day and the rebuilt temple? There was no presence of God. The ark was gone. The name of God was not on it. So in other words, Rochelle, what Yahweh is saying is, it will never be reversed. And verse 22. Thus says Yahweh of hosts, the God of Israel, add your burnt offerings to your sacrifices and eat flesh. Now look at this next phrase, which has caused confusion by Christians who just read the Bible. For I did not speak to your fathers or command them in the day that I brought them out of the land of Egypt concerning burnt offerings and sacrifices. Now, I'll never forget this. We were studying Jeremiah. Dr. Darnell used to sit right here, but this was when we were back at Emmanuel in that conference room. And I still, Hazel, to this day remember, I mean, it's maybe 20 years ago when we studied Jeremiah with the men. It's never been recorded, our studies and so on. And we read that verse. And Dr. Darnell, who later changed his mind, great Hebrew scholar, said to me, that verse right there says, God did not command burnt offerings and sacrifices. What He did command, verse 23, is, obey my voice, I will be your God, you will be my people, and you will walk in all the way which I command you, that it may be well with you. And here's what Dr. Darnell says. Dr. Darnell says, God just said, obey me. And the people instituted sacrifices like the pagan nations around them. That makes sense? And so I said, Dr. Darnell, man, I respect the heck out of you. I said, but I've got to disagree. Because when you come to the Hebrew Scriptures of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Yahweh is commanding the people to institute sacrifices and burnt offerings. He said to me, then Wade, how can you explain this verse? I didn't command you to do this. I commanded you to obey me. And he eventually changed his mind to my position, so I'm about to tell you what I told him. John Calvin, in commenting on this verse, says that Jeremiah is using in the Hebrew language something that is called comparative negation, which basically can be translated like this. I did not command sacrifices so much as I commanded obedience. It reminds me of the story, Hazel, of Charles Spurgeon, whose grandmother would constantly pray for him. And Spurgeon himself, in his autobiography, said he would sneak in at night after going out carousing and so on, and he'd walk up the steps. He lived in the upstairs of the cottage where his grandmother, who was a widowed preacher's wife, was living, and he would hear her late at night praying for her grandson. And that really, really affected him. And so one Sunday morning, after he heard his grandmother praying, he goes to church during a snowstorm, and he can't make it to the church that he is intended to going to, a congregational church, so he turns into a Baptist chapel. And there was an old farmer up there preaching. And as he was preaching, I mean, he was illiterate, Rochelle. He didn't know the Scriptures that much, but he was preaching the gospel. And then Spurgeon said, he pointed his bony finger at him and said, young man, you under the balcony, do you know Jesus? People have been praying for you. And Spurgeon says, how does he know that? And he gave his life to Christ right then. He went and talked to the Baptist pastor and said, what do I do now? And he said, well, you need to be baptized. And back then they called it living waters. So even though they waited a week, it had warmed up enough, they went to the river and they baptized Charles Spurgeon. He was baptized as a Baptist. Now his grandfather and his widowed grandmother, they were Congregationalists. So he waited to tell his mother of his commitment to Christ until after he was baptized. And it is recorded that he went to his grandmother and said, Grandma, I just want you to know, you've been praying for me to come to know Jesus. And I have accepted Him into my life. And I was baptized by the Baptist chapel pastor last week. And Spurgeon said his grandmother looked at him and said, Oh, my son, you're right, I've been praying for your salvation, but I never prayed you'd become a Baptist. And Spurgeon responded, true story, Grandma, God is able to do exceedingly abundantly more than you could ever ask or pray. Now, here's my point. That little story right there is comparative negation. I've prayed for your salvation, not for your baptism as a Baptist. I command obedience, and all you do is follow the sacrifices. Does that make sense? So it's not that he didn't command. What he's doing is saying, I want your lives, not your Shabbat worship. And by the way, this is a theme repeated throughout the prophets who say, Yahweh says, I desire obedience, not sacrifice. Okay? All right, we got to finish. Let's go on. Verse 23, obey my voice, I will be your people. That's what I commanded. Look at verse 24. Yet they did not obey or incline their ear, but walked in their own counsels in the stubbornness of their evil heart, and they went backward and not forward. In other words, they rebelled. Since the day that your fathers came out of the land of Egypt until this day, I have sent you all my servants, the prophets, daily rising early and sending them. Remember where we read earlier? Early in the morning I called and you did not hear. Okay, how did he call? He called through the prophets like Jeremiah, who early in the morning is saying, hear the word of Yahweh. And they're like, stop, just stop. Okay, that's what he's saying. Look at verse 26. Yet they, my people, did not listen to me or incline their ear, but stiffened their neck. They did more evil than their fathers. This word stiff-necked in Hebrew is kshe oref. By the way, you read it this way. In English, we go this way. It literally means hard neck or hard of neck. And it comes from farming, using ox. Like an ox that stiffens its neck and refuses the yoke, so Israel resisted Yahweh's guidance and refused to obey. In farming, farmers would train their oxen when it was time to put the yoke around their neck to bow their heads. But a stiff-necked ox refused the yoke. And what's the yoke? It was the yoke that kept people on path. Here's the meaning of this. My people are stiff-necked. They refuse correction. They resist guidance. They will not submit. They're unteachable. They will not bow their head. Does that make sense? And by the way, this was one of Jesus' favorite phrases in describing the Pharisees. You are a stiff-necked and stubborn people. Okay? All right, let's finish up. You shall, verse 27, you shall speak all these words to them, but they will not listen to you. You shall call to them, but they will not answer. You shall say to them, this is the nation that did not obey the voice of Yahweh their God or accept correction. Truth has perished and has been cut off from their mouth. Verse 29, cut off your hair, cast it away, and take up your lamentation on the bare heights. Remove yourself from the steps of the temple and go up to the bare heights of the mountains. For Yahweh has rejected and forsaken the generation of His wrath. By the way, in cutting hair off, who does that remind you of? Ezekiel. Who else does it remind you of? How about this guy, Elisha? Go up, thou bald head. Go up, thou bald head. Why was he bald? People said, well, he just didn't use Rogaine. No. He cut his hair off. Why do you cut your hair off? Here's the deal. In Scripture, hair is a crown of glory, a sign of consecration, a symbol of honor. Israel is the bride of the king. She is the queen. Her hair is her crown. By the way, this is also repeated in Corinthians, and it confuses Christians so much about hair being a crown of glory and all that stuff. Here's what the prophets would do. They would cut off their hair to symbolize the removing of the crown. In other words, you're no longer my bride. You're not the queen anymore. Now, we'll pick up. We've got about 2 or 3 more minutes. Verse 30. For the sons of Judah have done that which is evil in my sight, declares Yahweh. They have set their detestable things in the house which is called by my name to defile it. By the way, the detestable things are idols. Ezekiel says the same things. Remember, the pregnant women would bring their little idols into the courtyard of the women, and they would set them down. They would pray to the gods of Babylon for a successful delivery. By the way, the Romans and the Greeks took these Baal gods and gave them different names. Artemis was the Greek name for the god of pregnancy. Women would call out to Artemis, the god of war. And it's so fascinating. And I got to say this, and I'll make it quick. When Paul wrote to Timothy, in 1 Timothy, Paul is responding to a letter from Timothy where there was a woman, one woman from the cult of Artemis, who believed that women were superior to men and she was dominating the church. And Paul writes back and says, tell that woman to be quiet and learn in all submission. That individual injunction has been taken by my Southern Baptist friends and twisted and manipulated as a universal objection for any woman having any leadership. And I'm like, guys, you're nuts. Learn about Artemis. All right, sorry. Verse 31. They have built the high places of Topheth, which is in the valley of the son of Hinnom, to burn their sons and their daughters in the fire, which I did not command and did not come into my mind. By the way, Topheth, Rochelle, is Hebrew for drum. Drums. Here's what would happen. This is so sad. The valley of Hinnom is right there next to Jerusalem. And the people of Judah would come and worship Yahweh on Shabbat. This is Yahweh's house. This is Yahweh's house. This is Yahweh. We are His people. But they'd go down into the valley of Hinnom and they would beat the drum. Dun, 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 dun. And they would offer their sacrifice. They would offer to the gods of Baal their sons and daughters. They were imitating pagan nations. Child sacrifice. By the way, that's a little bit like what abortion is. I will sacrifice my child for security in the future.
But children in the Bible are such a blessing.
No, absolutely. It's a curse. Yes. Yes.
Your status.
Yes, correct. Absolutely. And they were doing the opposite of blessing. They were killing the children. That's why I'm saying the United States is about to face judgment. Verse 32. Therefore, behold, days are coming, declares Yahweh, when it will no longer be called Topheth or the valley of the son of Hinnom, but the valley of the slaughter. For they will bury in Topheth because there is no other place. The dead bodies of this people will be food for the birds of the sky, for the beasts of the earth. By the way, this is a prophecy of 586. 1/3 of the people died. There was no place to bury them, so they just threw them in the valley of Hinnom, where they used to offer their children. And no one will frighten them away. Verse 34, then I will make to cease from the cities of Judah, from the streets of Jerusalem, the voice of joy and the voice of gladness, the voice of the bridegroom and the voice of the bride, for the land will become a ruin. In other words, there'll be no marriages. The land is a ruin. Dead people in the valley of Hinnom. The land is a ruin. No brides, no bridegrooms. By the way, Rochelle, this is a symbol of the fact that the crown of glory of Israel has been removed. No more king and queen. Now, one final little story, and then maybe we'll close with this. By the way, next week it'll be Jeremiah 8. Did you know, true story, that during the Civil War, the bodies of Union soldiers became so numerous, hundreds of thousands, that they had nowhere to bury them. And the quartermaster general of Washington, D.C. lost his son, and his son was on top of a pile of bodies. And they came to the quartermaster and said, what do we do? And he turned and pointed to a hill across the river and said, bury them in Lee's front yard. Robert E. Lee, remember? He lived there in Washington, D.C., but he declined an appointment with the Union and went with his home, Virginia, and became the commander of the Confederate armies. Bury them in Lee's front yard. Why? That way he can never come home. And what do we call Lee's front yard today? Arlington Cemetery. And Lee never came home. I read Jeremiah 7 and I think there's nowhere to bury them. All right, let me ask you, does Jeremiah 7 now make a lot more sense? Okay, good. God bless you. Next week, Jeremiah 8. See you next week.